Your soulmate was on a dinner date last night, and shockingly, their date was. The rain had just begun to fall. Tiny droplets tapped against the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows as people hurried inside, escaping the cold evening. Candles flickered gently on every table, casting warm light across smiling faces and whispered conversations. In one quiet corner sat a person you had never met. Yet somehow, your heart already knew them. They checked the time on their phone for the 5th time. Maybe they're running late, they whispered to themselves. The waiter approached politely. Would you like to order while you wait? They smiled nervously. No. I'm waiting for someone. Minutes passed. Outside, cars splashed through puddles while soft piano music filled the room. Finally, the restaurant door opened. A figure stepped inside. Your soulmate immediately stood up. Their face lit with emotion. Not excitement. Not romance. Relief. The mysterious guest walked slowly toward the table and embraced them tightly. Anyone watching from across the room would have assumed they were lovers meeting after months apart. But appearances can be deceiving. The stranger sat down. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Instead, they simply looked at one another as though carrying years of unspoken memories. Then your soulmate smiled sadly. I didn't think you'd actually come. The stranger answered quietly. I almost didn't. Silence returned. The waiter brought 2 glasses of water. Neither touched them. Finally, your soulmate reached into a small envelope resting beside the plate. I've carried this for so long. The stranger frowned. You kept it? Every single day. Inside the envelope was an old photograph. The edges had faded. Time had left tiny cracks across its surface. The stranger stared at it with trembling hands. I haven't seen this in years. I know. They both laughed softly. Not because something was funny. Because remembering can sometimes hurt less than forgetting. Meanwhile, miles away, you had no idea this dinner was happening. You were simply living your normal evening. Maybe watching television. Maybe working late. Maybe wondering why life felt strangely incomplete lately. Without realizing it, 2 paths were slowly moving toward one another. Back at the restaurant, the waiter finally returned. Are you both ready to order? Your soulmate looked toward the stranger. You choose. The stranger smiled. You still can't decide? You remember. I remember everything. Dinner arrived. Warm soup. Fresh bread. Simple meals. Nothing extravagant. This wasn't a celebration. It wasn't romance. It was closure. Or perhaps a beginning. The stranger suddenly asked. Have you found them? Your soulmate froze. The question lingered between them. After several long seconds, they quietly answered. I think they're closer than ever. The stranger nodded knowingly. Do they know? No. Will you tell them? I hope I won't have to. Confusing? Absolutely. Because the person sitting across from your soulmate wasn't trying to steal them. They were preparing to let them go. They had shared an important chapter of life years ago. A friendship that had survived impossible circumstances. A promise that had never been broken. Tonight was the night that promise would finally end. Your soulmate reached into another pocket. This time, they removed a tiny wooden box. It looked ordinary. But judging by the careful way they held it, it contained something priceless. The stranger whispered. "So you really kept it all this time?" "I couldn't throw it away." "You don't need it anymore." "I know." Slowly, they opened the box. Inside rested a delicate silver key. Old. Slightly worn. Attached to it was a faded handwritten tag. The stranger laughed through tears. "I can't believe this still exists." Your soulmate smiled. "It reminded me that every locked door eventually opens." Neither noticed the waiter watching curiously from a distance. To everyone else, it looked exactly like a romantic reunion. But in truth, this dinner was about releasing the past so the future could finally arrive. Outside, the rain stopped. Clouds slowly parted. Moonlight reflected across the wet streets. The stranger stood. "It's time." Your soulmate nodded. No more looking back. No more wondering what could have been. Only gratitude. They hugged one last time. A long embrace filled with respect. Not longing. When they separated, the stranger smiled warmly. "They're going to make you incredibly happy." Your soulmate looked surprised. "How can you be so certain?" "Because after everything you've survived, you finally know how to love without fear." The stranger walked toward the exit. Just before leaving, they turned around. "Oh. When you finally meet them, tell them thank you." Your soulmate looked confused. "For what?" "For giving me the chance to say goodbye." The restaurant door closed. And just like that, the mysterious dinner date disappeared into the night, leaving behind only one untouched candle, one empty chair, and a future waiting to unfold. The restaurant grew quieter after the stranger left. Your soulmate remained seated, staring at the small silver key resting on the table. For a long moment, they didn't move. The waiter approached gently. "Would you like the check?" Your soulmate smiled politely. "Yes, and thank you." As the waiter walked away, your soulmate looked one last time toward the door where the stranger had disappeared. Instead of sadness, there was peace. A chapter that had remained unfinished for years had finally reached its ending. Outside, the streets glistened beneath the city lights. The cool air carried the scent of rain, and for the first time in a long while, your soulmate felt lighter. They slipped the silver key back into the wooden box and whispered, "It's time." At that very moment, your evening was unfolding in an ordinary way. Perhaps you were scrolling through your phone, answering messages, or thinking about tomorrow's responsibilities. Yet, an unexplainable feeling lingered in your heart, a quiet sense that something important was changing. You couldn't explain it. But somewhere deep inside, hope had begun to replace uncertainty. The next morning, your soulmate woke earlier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the curtains as birds sang outside the window. They made a cup of coffee and stood silently, watching the world awaken. On the kitchen counter sat a notebook. Inside were dreams, goals, and promises written over many years. Some pages were filled with excitement. Others carried tears. Today, they opened to a blank page. Across the top they wrote, "The future begins today. No more waiting. No more living in yesterday. No more wondering if they deserved happiness." Later that afternoon, your soulmate visited a quiet park where they often went to think. Children laughed nearby. Couples walked hand in hand. Older friends sat on benches sharing stories. Watching them, your soulmate realized something important. Love wasn't perfect. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about choosing kindness, honesty, and forgiveness again and again. As they stood to leave, they noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry several grocery bags. Without hesitation, your soulmate hurried over. "May I help you?" The woman smiled gratefully. "Thank you. My knees aren't what they used to be." They walked together for several blocks, talking about life. Before saying goodbye, the woman looked directly into your soulmate's eyes. "You have a good heart." Your soulmate smiled. "I'm trying." "Keep trying," she replied. "Someone is going to be very thankful they met you." Those words stayed with your soulmate long after they parted ways. Meanwhile, your own life continued moving forward. There were victories. There were disappointments. There were moments when you questioned whether the right person would ever enter your life. Yet every experience was quietly preparing you for the day your paths would cross. Neither of you knew it. But every choice, every delay, and every unexpected turn was guiding you toward the same destination. That evening, your soulmate returned home and opened the wooden box one final time. Instead of keeping the silver key, they placed it inside a small envelope. On the front they wrote, "Thank you for teaching me to let go." The next morning, they mailed it to the stranger from the dinner. No return address. No explanation. Only gratitude. As the envelope disappeared into the mailbox, your soulmate smiled. The past no longer needed to be carried. There was now room for something new. And somewhere, without realizing it, you were taking one more step toward the person whose heart was finally ready to meet yours. Several days passed after the dinner. Life returned to its familiar rhythm, yet something had changed. Your soulmate noticed it in the quiet moments. The heavy feeling they had carried for years was gone. For the first time in a long while, they weren't looking over their shoulder. They weren't replaying old conversations or wondering what might have been. Instead, they began noticing little things they had overlooked before: the warmth of the morning sun, the laughter of strangers, the comfort of a peaceful evening. It felt as though life had gently whispered, "You're ready now." Across town, you experienced something similar. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flashing sign or mysterious message. Just a growing feeling that it was time to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start embracing the present. You began saying yes to opportunities you might once have ignored. A new place. A different routine. A conversation with someone you normally wouldn't have met. Without realizing it, each decision brought your path closer to your soulmates. One Saturday morning, your soulmate visited a neighborhood bookstore. They wandered through the aisles, running their fingers across rows of novels and journals. A small display near the entrance caught their attention. A handwritten sign read, "Every great story begins with one unexpected chapter." They smiled. Those words felt strangely personal. As they reached for a book, another hand reached for the very same copy. "Oh, I'm sorry," a gentle voice said. Your soulmate stepped back with a laugh. "No, please, you can have it." The stranger smiled. "How about we flip a coin?" They both laughed. After a brief conversation, the stranger chose a different book and wished your soulmate a wonderful day. It was a simple encounter. But it reminded your soulmate that meaningful connections often begin with the smallest moments. That evening, your soulmate received a message from the person they had met for dinner. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for setting us both free." Your soulmate stared at the screen for several moments before smiling. They didn't reply. They didn't need to. Some goodbyes don't require another conversation. They simply need acceptance. As weeks passed, your soulmate began volunteering at a local community center on weekends. They helped organize donated books, served meals, and listened to people's stories. One afternoon, a little boy looked up at them and asked, "Why do you always smile?" Your soulmate thought for a moment. "Because someone once reminded me that every new day is a gift." The boy grinned. "I like that. So do I." Meanwhile, life continued to surprise you. You found yourself changing in ways you hadn't expected. You became more patient, more understanding, more willing to trust that the future could hold something beautiful. You didn't know who your soulmate was. But unknowingly, you were becoming the person they had been waiting to meet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, your soulmate stood on a quiet bridge overlooking a calm river. The breeze carried away the last traces of uncertainty. They whispered softly, "Wherever you are, I hope you're happy." It wasn't a wish filled with desperation. It was a prayer filled with hope. Somewhere beneath the same sky, you paused for a moment without knowing why. You looked toward the horizon and smiled. A feeling of peace settled over you. Neither of you knew the other's name. Neither of you knew how close destiny had brought your paths. But the distance between your stories was growing smaller with every passing day. The dinner date that once seemed mysterious had never been the beginning of a love story. It had been the ending of one chapter, so that another could finally begin. Autumn slowly arrived. The trees exchanged their bright green leaves for shades of gold and crimson. The air became cooler, carrying with it the quiet promise that every season has its purpose. Your soulmate had changed in ways that even their closest friends noticed. "You seem different," one friend remarked over coffee. "Different how?" your soulmate asked. "You smile more. You don't seem weighed down anymore." Your soulmate looked out the cafe window and smiled. "I finally stopped carrying what wasn't meant to stay." Their friend nodded, though they didn't fully understand. Some journeys can only be understood by the person who walks them. Meanwhile, your own life was beginning to shift. A project that had once seemed impossible suddenly fell into place. A phone call opened a new opportunity. Someone invited you to an event you almost declined. You nearly said no. But something inside urged you to go. You couldn't explain why. You simply felt that staying home would mean missing something important. That same weekend, your soulmate received an invitation to a charity event held in a beautiful garden. At first, they hesitated. Crowds weren't really their favorite. But then they remembered the promise they had written in their notebook. Say yes to new beginnings. So they accepted. The evening arrived. Soft lights hung from the trees. Music floated through the air. People laughed as they shared meals and conversations beneath the stars. Your soulmate walked slowly through the garden, admiring the peaceful atmosphere. Nearby, you arrived at the very same event. Traffic had delayed you. You almost turned around. But you didn't. You stepped through the entrance just as your soulmate walked toward the refreshment table. Only a few meters separated you. Neither of you noticed. Not yet. A volunteer accidentally bumped into your soulmate, causing a small stack of books to tumble onto the ground. Without thinking, you hurried over to help. "I'm sorry," the volunteer said. "It's okay," you both replied at the exact same moment. You looked at each other. For a brief second, the world seemed unusually quiet. Neither of you spoke. Instead, you exchanged a polite smile. Then someone called your name from across the garden. You apologized and walked away. Your soulmate watched you disappear into the crowd. Something about that brief encounter felt strangely familiar. Not because they recognized your face, but because your kindness reminded them of the future they had hoped for. Later that evening, as the event came to an end, your soulmate sat on a nearby bench. The elderly woman they had once helped with groceries happened to pass by. She recognized them immediately. "There you are," she said with a warm smile. Your soulmate stood to greet her. "I haven't seen you in weeks. I've been keeping busy." The woman looked toward the crowd. "Did you meet someone tonight?" Your soulmate laughed softly. "I don't think so." The woman smiled knowingly. Sometimes the most important meetings begin with only a few seconds. Before leaving, she added, "Don't worry. What's meant for you doesn't rush, but it rarely arrives a moment too late." That night, both of you returned home with an unusual feeling. Neither of you could explain it. Neither of you even realized you had crossed paths. Yet both of you found yourselves thinking about the same brief moment. The same shared smile. The same unexpected sense of peace. Far away, the stranger from the dinner date looked up at the night sky. They smiled to themselves and whispered. It finally happened. Not because you and your soulmate had fallen in love. Not yet. But because fate had quietly introduced two hearts that were finally ready to meet. The mysterious dinner from weeks ago had never been about holding on to the past. It had been about making room for the future. And now, that future had begun. Days turned into weeks after the charity event. Life continued as usual, yet neither of you could forget that brief encounter. You couldn't remember every detail of the other person's face, but you remembered the kindness in their eyes. Your soulmate felt the same. It was as if destiny had whispered, "Be patient. This isn't the end of the story." One crisp Saturday morning, both of you made an unexpected decision. Without planning it, you each visited the same farmer's market in the heart of the city. The market was alive with color. Fresh flowers filled the air with their fragrance. Musicians played cheerful melodies. Children laughed as they chased bubbles drifting through the crowd. Your soulmate stopped at a small bookstall, where an elderly bookseller smiled warmly. "I've been saving this book for someone," he said. Your soulmate looked puzzled. "For me?" "I believe so." As they reached for the book, a familiar voice came from the other side of the table. "I've been looking for that title everywhere." It was you. This time, there was no crowd pulling either of you away. No interruption. No hurried goodbye. You both smiled, recognizing each other from the charity event. "We've met before," you said. "I was thinking the same thing," your soulmate replied. "So am I," you answered. Weeks later, your friendship grew stronger. You encouraged each other through difficult days. You celebrated small victories together. You laughed more than either of you had in years. One evening, while walking through the same park where your soulmate had once reflected on the past, they stopped beneath a tree whose leaves danced in the evening breeze. "I want to tell you something," they said. You listened quietly. "A few months ago, I had dinner with someone who was once very important in my life." You nodded, waiting. It wasn't a romantic date. It was a goodbye. We met to thank each other for the lessons we shared and to let go of what no longer belonged in our future. They looked into your eyes. "If that dinner had never happened, I don't think I would have been ready to meet you." You smiled gently. "I'm grateful it did." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. It was the kind of silence that exists between two people who understand each other without needing many words. As the sun dipped below the horizon, your soulmate reached into their pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. You recognized it immediately from the story they had shared. Inside, the silver key was gone. In its place was a folded note. They opened it and read aloud. "The greatest gift isn't finding the right person. It's becoming the right person when they arrive." Your soulmate closed the box and smiled. "I think I'm finally home." You smiled back.